Salvete omnes. This is exercise B of chapter 49, focusing on dependent subjunctive clauses, cum clauses, that is cum temporal, cum causal, and cum concessive. We are to translate the following Latin sentences into English. Prima sententia prima. Cum animal vulneratum invenire non possemus, coacti sumus id relinquere in silva. So cum, when you encounter the word cum and you determine that it is a conjunction and not a preposition meaning with, taking the ablative of accompaniment, but a conjunction, go ahead and translate it as when, since, although. And come back, readjust your translation once you finish, figure out from context which one sounds the best. There can be more than one right answer. So, cum animal, cum, when, since, although. Animal, from animal, animalis, neuter, singular, nominative or accusative, the subject or the direct object, animal, a living thing. Vulneratum, vulneratum, from vulnero, vulnerare, vulneravi, vulneratus, to wound. Vulneratum, this is the fourth principal part. So vulneratus, this is the Us, this is the neuter form. So this is a perfect passive participle. Comes from the fourth principal part. It is a participle, so it's a verbal adjective. It has adjective endings, comes from a verb, vulnero, vulneratum, us, like altus, first and second declension adjective. It agrees with animal in gender, number, and case. So vulneratum, either nominative or accusative, singular, and neuter. We will say wounded or having been wounded. The animal having been wounded, or the wounded animal. Remember, there is some blurry line distinction between adjectives and participles. So sometimes perfect passive participles can show up as adjectives like wounded or paratus, prepared, etc. Invenire, present active infinitive of invenio, invenire, inveni, inventus, means to find. You can also see the word invent in inventus, to come upon, to just sort of be walking along and, oh, look, there it is. I found it. Invenire. So, to find. Known, the adverb known negates, because it's an adverb. Verbs can also negate adjectives and other adverbs. Here it's negating this verb possemos. This is the main verb of this subjunctive, this dependent subjunctive clause. It is in the imperfect subjunctive, first person plural, active voice, so possum, posse, potui, to be able to. If this is the imperfect subjunctive, then we can go ahead and determine that we're going to be in secondary sequence when we get to the main clause. So the main clause, the main verb will be perfect, imperfect, or pluperfect will be in secondary sequence, because this will trigger an imperfect, or if this were prior action, a pluperfect subjunctive verb. Because this is imperfect, we know that this action is contemporaneous or subsequent to the main verb, whichever verb that is. So when, since, or although we were not able to find, possum screams out for a complementary infinitive to complement or complete the meaning of possum. We're not able to invenire, find, the animal vulneratum. If possemus, first person plural, we is the subject, that makes animal vulneratum the accusative singular neuter direct object. So when, since, or although we were not able to find the wounded animal, the animal having been wounded, the animal which had been wounded, coacti sumus id relinquere in silva. Coacti sumus, from cogo, cogere, coegi, coactus. It's cum ago. It's not just ago, do, drive, or act, but it's co or cum ago, to either drive together, to collect, or to really drive someone, to force or compel someone to do something. And that is its meaning right here. It is first person plural. It is perfect and passive. So it's the fourth principal part, coacti, acting like an adjective, with a helping verb, present tense of sum, sumus. So first person plural, perfect passive indicative. This is the main verb. So this is a dependent subjunctive clause. Here's our dependent subjunctive verb, posemos. It is imperfect subjunctive because it is contemporaneous with this main verb, which is perfect tense. So we are in secondary sequence like we said earlier. So we were forced. We were compelled. We have been forced. We have been compelled. And this verb, kogo, means to force. Usually in the active voice, kogo takes subject accusative and an objective infinitive. You force a subject accusative to do an objective infinitive. When this verb shows up in the passive, it just takes a complementary infinitive to complete its meaning. Because you have to be forced to do something. Like possum needs a complementary infinitive to be able to do something. You can do something. You can find. Since we could not find the wounded animal, when we could not find the wounded animal, we were forced to relinquere, from relinquere, relinquere, reliqui, relictus, to leave it behind, to abandon it, id being pronoun, a demonstrative from is, ea, id. This is the nominative singular neuter or accusative singular neuter. We've already determined that sumos is going to be the subject. That makes this the accusative direct object of the verb relinquere. Its antecedent is the animal. It agrees with animal in gender and number. It also agrees with animal in case. In this case. So we were forced to leave it, meaning the animal, behind in silva. In plus the ablative shows location, in the forest. So this could actually be, this cum clause could be cum temporal, or you could say cum circumstantial, because we're in secondary sequence and the verb is subjunctive. Or this could be cum causal. So there are two translations here. A longer narration, more information would give us better context as to whether it's temporal or causal. Here we just have one sentence. So the temporal flavor would be translated, when we were not able to find the wounded animal, we were forced to leave it in the woods, or we were forced to abandon it in the forest. The causal flavor would be translated, since or because we were not able to find the wounded animal, we were forced to leave it in the woods. We were forced to abandon it in the forest. Leave it behind in the forest. All right, optime. Very well done. Secunda, sententia secunda. Marcus, cum hostium insidias consulibus renuntiavit, tum parvus puer erat. So we have Marcus, nominative, singular, masculine, subject, because he's the nominative case. Our Marcus is going to be doing something. He's going to be doing the action of the main verb. Cum, get used to seeing a subject and then the cum clause. This means that Marcus is going to be the subject of the cum clause as well as the subject of the main verb. The Romans love to take the subject of both clauses outside the cum clause, even though it might seem more correct to translate Marcus inside the cum clause. Something like, so when Marcus reported the ambushes, the traps, the plots of the enemy to the consuls, he was then at that time a small boy. We could also say Marcus, comma, when he reported the plots of the enemy to the consuls, was at that time a small boy. You have some options. So Marcus is the subject here. The cum clause is cum hostium insidias consulibus renuntiavit. Notice that cum takes the indicative here. When cum takes the indicative, that means that we are dealing purely with a temporal distinction, meaning only time is in play here. So usually you will find an adverb like tum or eo tempore or hoc tempore or illo tempore to tip you off with the time, the temporal aspect. So cum tum, at that time when. At that time when. Then when. When? Then. So at that time, Marcus was a small boy, was the time when he reported renuntiavit, third person singular perfect active indicative, to the dative consuls. And what did he report to them? The direct object insidias. This is insidiae, insidiarum, feminine plural, always feminine, always plural. It means traps or plots, ambushes. You can see insidious. Hostium is the genitive plural, masculine of hostis, hostis masculine, of the enemy, the enemy's plots. When Marcus reported the enemy's plots to the consul, he was at that time a small boy. He was a small boy then. Notice that's cum, taking the indicative. This is definitely cum temporal. Tertia, sententia tertia. Cum ad illam insulam pocerrimam pervenissent, ibi manere constituerunt. So cum, when sense although, ad plus the accusative motion towards, we are motioning towards the illam, from ille, illa, illud, illam. This is going to be the accusative singular feminine. That over there yonder, insulam. Insula, I, feminine, island. Accusative singular feminine goes with ad. We are motioning towards that yonder over there island, which is also pocerrimam, from pocer, pocra, pocrum. This is the superlative. If the adjective in the singular masculine ends in er, like poker or miser or keller, the superlative will have a double R. Miserimus, pocerimus, celerimus. And then it has usa on endings attached to that suffix in order to tell us with what noun it modifies, with what noun it agrees. So accusative singular feminine pocerimam modifies the noun insulam. So when, since, although, to or towards that yonder very beautiful island, most beautiful island, it's superlative. Pervenissent, pervenissent, pervenio, pervenire, perveni, perventus. To come thoroughly, so to to really do it to the point where you arrive somewhere. You go somewhere to the point where you, pervenio, you arrive there. It takes ad or in plus the accusative of motion to indicate to where you are arriving. In English, though, we would say something like to arrive at. And at to me sounds like ablative of location, but the Romans really emphasized the movement, the motion towards. So that's why it's in or ad plus the accusative motion. So cum ad illam insulam pocerrimam pervenissent. So this is pluperfect subjunctive, third person plural, active, pluperfect subjunctive of pervenio. When, since, although they had arrived at yonder very beautiful island, ibi manere constituerunt. Ibi, adverb meaning there, in that place, referring back to the island. Manere, manere is the present active infinitive of maneo, manere, mansi, mansus, to stay or remain. And constituerunt, third person plural, perfect active indicative of constituo, constituere, constitui, constitutus. So they, here it means decided, and it takes a complementary infinitive. They decided to manere, to wait ibi there in that place. They decided to stay in that place. So this, for tertia, number 3, this could be, once again, either, both of them, really. When they had arrived at that far off, very beautiful island, they decided to stay there. They decided to wait there. Since they had arrived at that very far off, beautiful island, they decided to wait there. They decided to stay there. Either one could work. Either one. It could be either cum temporal / circumstantial or cum causal. Quarta, sententia quarta. Cum solus scias quis villam incendaret, id tuo patri nuntiare debes. So cum, when sense although, solus ahon, meaning only, alone, solitary. Skios, skio, skiere, skivi, skitus. Science, the stuff that we know. Scientia is the stuff that we skio know. Skios there, that is second person singular. That is the present active subjunctive. So, you may know. But with cum there, cum conjunction. So, when sense although, you, and since this is nominative, it goes with the subject, you alone know, since only you know. Quis is the interrogative pronoun, quis quid. So quis is masculine, feminine, quid is the neuter. So quis is who and quid is what. Here we have an interrogative, who. Wilam is the accusative singular feminine of wila, I feminine, farmhouse. And incenderet, from incendo, incendere, incendi, incensus. So incenderet, that could either be the third person singular future perfect active indicative, or it could be the third person singular perfect active subjunctive. And I'm going with the subjunctive here because this looks an awful lot like an indirect question. This verb, skios, is subjunctive because it's going with the conjunction cum, since you alone know. Well, what is the thing that you alone know? You know, quis wilam incenderet. Who incenderet, to burn or set fire to? Who set fire to the farmhouse? You should be able to pick the direct question out of the indirect question, and it's going to be quis wilam incendit. Who set fire to the farmhouse? In an indirect question, so with the main, this subjunctive verb, skios, going with the cum, it's present subjunctive. So we know that the main verb, whatever that verb is, we haven't really gotten there yet, have we? That's going to be in primary sequence, so present, future, future perfect, present subjunctive, or in imperative. That's the only thing that can, primary sequence can trigger a present subjunctive in this cum clause. Now, why is this perfect subjunctive? Because it happened prior to the main verb. The present subjunctive here is being used to show an action that is contemporaneous or subsequent to the main verb. And the perfect here is showing an action that's prior to the main verb. So which one happened first? First, the farmhouse got burnt down. Someone burnt down the farmhouse. Then we're asking who burnt down the farmhouse, and when, since, although you're the only one that knows. Cum solus skios, since you alone know, when you, it's probably going to be since, causal. Since you alone know who has already burnt down the farmhouse, because the dirty deed's been done, id tuo patri nuntiare debes. Id, a nominative or accusative singular neuter of is ea id, the neutral demonstrative pronoun, this or that. Tuo, possessive adjective modifies patri. So patri, pater, patris, masculine. Dative singular masculine, probably is going to be indirect object, but I'm going to hold off 100% knowing for sure. Tuo modifies patri. So to or for your father, to or for your dad. So the id, the it, something to or for your dad. Nuntiare, the present active infinitive of nuntio, nuntiare, nuntiavi, nuntiatus, to report or to announce. So announce, that can take a dative. You announce something, an accusative, id, to a dative, to your father. And then debes. All right, the main verb, and now everything falls into place. Debes, second person singular, present active, indicative of debeo, debere, debui, debitus. You owe, or ought. Here it means ought. And it's followed by a complementary infinitive, nuntiare, to complement or complete its meaning, because you ought to do something. You ought to announce or report this thing, which thing? The thing, to your father. Well, what thing? Oh, that someone burnt down the farmhouse. That's what the "it" is referring to. It's referring to this clause. Well, why should I do that? Because you alone know it. Since you alone know who has burnt down the farmhouse, you ought, present tense, you ought to announce or report it to your father. So, debes, present tense. Why? We are in the primary sequence, just like we predicted way back in the beginning. Wow, Latin actually follows rules. Quinta, sententia quinta. Cum multum frumentum non habeamus, eis tamen magnam partem dabimus. All right, cum, when, since, although. Multum, multus, much, plural, many. Frumentum, frumentum, neuter, grain. So frumentum is nominative or accusative, singular neuter. It's either the subject or the direct object, and multum seems like it modifies it. They agree in gender, number, and case. Non is an adverb, modifying the verb habeamos, so it's negating not habeamos. From habeo, habere, habui, habitus, which means to have. Notice eamos, habeamos. The stem is habe. We add the a and add the mus in the present subjunctive. This is first person plural, present active subjunctive, to have, to possess, to have in possession, to own. Since, when, since, although, we do not, at the present time, because it's present subjunctive, have much grain. The subject is first person plural we, so grain must be the direct object. And if this is present subjunctive, then we are probably dealing with a primary sequence main verb. Dabimus. That's right, dabimus. Eis, tamen. All right, eis. Dative or ablative plural. You could also say is, double is. Dative or ablative plural of isea, id, the neutral demonstrative. So to or for this or that, or something to do with the ablative. So many options. Let's keep them all open. Tamen. Tamen, first of his name. So tamen is a post-positive conjunction, means yet, nevertheless, still. It's usually paired with a cum concessive / adversative. Although we do not have much grain, nevertheless, yet, still, it's adversative, meaning that it goes adverse or against what your expectations are. Not sure yet what the eis is doing. Let's keep going. Magnam, from magnosa, great, large, big in size or importance. It's an adjective, and it looks like it's modifying partem, from pars partis feminine, meaning part. This is the accusative singular feminine. It's probably going to be the direct object. Like, I don't see a preposition in front of this to indicate motion towards. Until something changes my mind later, I'm going to assume direct object. And magna modifies it, agrees with it in gender, number, and case. So something's going to happen to a big part. Nevertheless, something, a big part, and then something to do with eis. Dabimus, first person plural, future active indicative of do, dare, dedidatus. So we will give. Nevertheless, we will give the direct object a great part. The dative. Dative loves to work with do, dare, dedidatus. In fact, do, dare, dedidatus forms the root of dative, dative. So we will give a direct object to an indirect object. Nevertheless, we will give a great part to them. Nevertheless, we will give them a great part. So we have this tamen tipping us off to an adversative or concessive cum here. Although, even though we do not have much grain, nevertheless, we will give a great part to them. We will give them a great part, a big slice. Once again, we are in primary sequence. That's why we have the present subjunctive here. Sexta. Cum ab his quaereret, quae civitates in armis essent, causam belli cognovit. So cum, when, since, although. Ab plus the ablative shows separation. Can also show personal agent if we have a passive voice verb. Quereret. Oh, well, that puts the stake in the heart of that. Quereret is active voice. Third person singular, imperfect subjunctive active of quaero, quaerere, quaesivi, quaesitus. To quaestio, ask a question, to quest, to look after, to go after something, to question, to ask after. Takes the ablative with ab to ask of someone, to ask something of someone. So quaerere. Imperfect subjunctive, that means that we have secondary sequence for the main verb, because the secondary sequence kicks us into either the imperfect subjunctive or the pluperfect subjunctive if the action were prior. Because it's the imperfect subjunctive, the action is contemporaneous or subsequent to the main verb, whatever that main verb gonna be. So when, since, although, he, she, it, asked piece, asked of these people. He's, hic, haec, hoc is right here. These right here people. Quae civitates in armis essent. Quae civitates, quae, now this looks like qui, quae, quod. Could also be the plural interrogative pronoun or the interrogative adjective. So many things. It could also be so many forms. It could be singular feminine nominative. It could be nominative accusative plural neuter. So let's move on. Civitates. Civitates from civitas, civitatis, feminine. If it ends in tas, then in the nominative, it must end in tatis in the genitive, and it must be feminine gender. So civitates, feminine, it means state. So this is the nominative or accusative, plural feminine, the states. Now, quae, that could also be nominative, plural feminine. I actually left that off when I enumerated the different forms it could be. Naughty me. Quae civitates, quae can modify civitates. Quae can be nominative singular feminine or nominative plural feminine. So civitates can be nominative plural feminine or accusative plural feminine. The suspense is killing me. Hope it lasts. In plus the ablative shows location. In plus the accusative would show motion, but armis is definitely ablative. Arma, aurum, always neuter, always plural. Arms, defensive weaponry. Armor, in arms. Essent, okay, this is sum esse fui futurus, third person plural. Imperfect active, subjunctive. So, another subjunctive. This is imperfect subjunctive. This is also imperfect subjunctive. Man, we are definitely in secondary sequence. Quae civitates in armis essent. Quae is actually an interrogative adjective here. It's an adjective because it modifies civitates. We're not just asking quae what were in arms. We're asking quae civitates. This is an adjective because it's modifying a noun. Adjectives are words that modify nouns. Civitates is a noun, therefore quae, interrogative, adjective. We're asking which states, which ones, which states were in arms, which states were under arms. So when, since, although, he asked of these people, which states were in arms? This is actually the direct object of quaereret. This indirect question is actually, it's a substantive, so it's a noun clause, because it answers the question, what was he asking of these people? Well, he's asking what states were in arms. Quae civitates in armis sunt. What states are in arms? And when he asked of these, which states were in arms, causam belli cognovit. Causam, the accusative singular feminine of causa I feminine, cause, reason. Belli, from bellum e neuter, war. This is the genitive singular neuter, so the cause of war. Cognovit, cognovit, from cognosco, cognoscere, cognovi, cognitus, to learn or to find out. Cognovit means he has learned. That can also be translated by the present tense, he knows. Because if you have learned something, that means that you know it right now. So the perfect tense, he has learned, can also be translated by the present he knows. This is the main clause. Look how short the main clause is as opposed to the subordinate clause. Get used to it. Caesar loves to do stuff like that. So, when, since, although he asked of these people which states were in arms, he learned, he discovered, he figured out, he knows the cause of war. He learned the cause of war. So, secondary sequence, it's perfect tense. He learned the cause of war. When he asked of these which states were in arms, he learned the cause of war. We could also say, I do believe, that because he asked of these which states were in arms, he learned the cause of war, since he asked them. I could also see that. I think a more correct answer would be this is a cum temporal / circumstantial clause, but I could also see the argument for a cum causal for sententia sexta. Septima, sententia septima. Cum primum Caesar proelium commissit, ei renuntiatum est hostium milites in unum locum coactos fortiter pugnare. So cum primum, all right, if we have cum primum, that's very close to quam primum. Quam primum means as soon as possible, ASAP. Cum primum is as soon as. It's the equivalent to simul atque. So, as soon as Caesar proelium commissit, Caesar is the subject of the verb commissit because he's in the nominative. Caesar is masculine. As soon as Caesar proelium, proeli neuter battle, either the nominative or accusative, it must be accusative because Caesar is already the subject and we don't have a conjunction. So the subjects aren't Caesar and the battle did something. Caesar did something to the battle. Proelium is the accusative, direct object. Commissit, from committo, committere, commissi, commissus. With proelium committere, it's an idiom that means to join battle. That means to start or commence battle. It's that moment where the two forces, the two sides, they run at each other and then crash together to join battle. So as soon as Caesar joined battle, it's perfect tense. So the perfect tense used with cum primum, and notice it's perfect indicative. This is a cum temporal, and cum primum often uses the perfect tense, whereas in English we would more likely use the pluperfect tense. So as soon as Caesar had joined battle, that would also be correct. What then happened in the main clause? Ei renuntiatum est. So ei could be nominative plural masculine, but when I see renuntiatum est, I note that the subject is singular, a third person singular, est. So ei cannot be nominative plural, but it could also be dative singular, masculine, feminine, or neuter, because isea id is one damn heteroclats, where the dative singular ends in the letter I, and the genitive singular ends in an ius. So the genitive is eius, the dative is ei. This is definitely the dative, ei. Indirect object. It goes with renuntiatum est. Renuntio, renuntiare, renuntiavi, renuntiatus. So to not just nuntio announce it, but to announce it back, to announce it again. So like to report. This is typically the word for to report back, to go back and make a report. It is in the perfect passive because it's renuntiatum est. The subject is an it. I can tell by the neuter gender, renuntiatum est. Renuntiatus aum est. This is why I make you write the us aum when you synopsize these perfective passive verbs. So renuntiatum est. There's the neuter. It was reported to him. A, that's the dative. It was reported to the indirect object. A, to him. The antecedent of A is Caesar. So as soon as Caesar had joined battle, it was reported to him. It has been reported to him. Probably best to say it was reported to him. What was reported to him? What thing? That's going to be a noun. But it's not just one word. What was reported to Caesar? Stuff. Direct object stuff. It was reported to him that indirect statement. This whole thing is what was reported to Caesar. The subject will be in the accusative case and the verb will be an infinitive. The tense of the infinitive will come from the temporal relation between the infinitive and the main verb. The main verb being renuntiatum est. A present infinitive will show a contemporaneous action, perfect infinitive will show prior action, and a future infinitive will show subsequent action. So it was reported to him that hostium, genitive plural masculine of hostis, hostis masculine, enemy, the enemy. So enemies, apostrophe s. Enemies milites, nominative or accusative, plural masculine, of miles militis, masculine, soldier. We should normally not find a nominative in an indirect statement. It is possible, but we normally don't find a nominative in indirect statement because the subject's an accusative. So I'm going to go ahead and go for milites being the subject. It's a great candidate for an accusative subject of the indirect statement. The enemy soldiers. In plus the accusative shows motion towards. In unum locum, into, not just in plus the ablative location, into one place, one location. Coactos, coactos. We saw this up here with kogo. So, whoopsie. Kogo, kogore, koegi, coactus. So, coactosaom. And it's going to be, this is a perfect passive participle. Osaom. It agrees with some accusative plural masculine, it's milites, noun, that has been driven, gathered, or compelled. Probably has been driven into one place. Coactos. What's been driven into one place? The soldiers, the milites. The enemy soldiers having been driven into one place, fortiter pugnare. So, pugnare being a present active infinitive, this is the main verb of the indirect statement. Because it's a present infinitive, it's happening contemporaneously with the main verb. It was announced to Caesar what's happening at the same time. The soldiers of the enemy are fighting. They are currently, right now, as it was reported to Caesar, fighting fortiter bravely. Fortiter being the adverb of fortis, forte. It was reported to him that the soldiers of the enemy soldiers, were fighting bravely. Now, what are we going to do with this participial phrase? Well, because this is a perfect passive participle, this action happened prior to the fighting. It also happened prior to the reporting. So as soon as Caesar had joined battle, it was reported to him that the soldiers of the enemy, comma, having been driven into one place, a single location, comma, were fighting bravely. Because the pugnare, the fighting, is happening at the same time as a past tense verb. It was reported to Caesar last week that the enemy were at that time fighting bravely. But they had already, coactos, been driven into one place. Optime. That was a good one. Octava, sententia octava. Cum calamitatis timor magnus sit. Galli tamen maxima cum audacia impetum faciunt. So cum, when sense although, calamitatis, calamitas, if its nominative is calamitas, ends in tas, its genitive is calamitatis, ends in tatis, and it must be feminine gender. So calamity, downfall, ruination. So when sense although, of the calamity, timor, timoris masculine, fear, dread, nominative singular masculine, the dread of calamity, the fear of ruination. Magnus sit. Magnus, osa great, large, big in size or importance, agrees with timor in gender, number, and case with a linking verb. So we have a subject, timor, a linking verb, and a predicate nominative. That's why Magnus is in the nominative case. It's an adjective in the nominative case. Since the fear of calamity, the fear of ruination, is great, present subjunctive, it is great, now we know that the main verb will be primary sequence. So calamitatis, what kind of genitive is that? It's the fear of calamity. It's not calamity's fear. Calamity ain't afraid. Ruination don't fear none, no one. So it's not possession. Calamity is not possessing the fear of calamity. It's not calamity's fear, but the fear towards calamity. This is an objective genitive. When, since, although, the fear of or towards calamity, ruination, ruin, downfall, is great, large, looms large. Galli tamen, the tamen, first of his name, nevertheless, yet, still, that tips us off that we have concessive or adversative cum. Although the fear of calamity is great, nevertheless, Galli, nominative plural masculine, the Gauls, maxima cum audacia. We have maxima, the superlative of magnus not just great, but maximus greatest, biggest, largest. Ablative, singular feminine. Cum preposition is helping us tip off that we have an ablative of manner. Ablatives of manner, they're very adverbial. They show in what way, in what manner, or how the action of the verb is carried out. Not by what means, that would be ablative of means, but how the action is carried out. Nevertheless, with greatest, maxima, greatest, biggest, largest, probably going to be greatest. Audacia, I, feminine, boldness, with greatest boldness, ablative of manner. We could have omitted the cum and just said maxima audacia, but we decided to use the cum, and you must use the word order adjective, cum, noun. Impetum, from impetus, us, masculine, a charge, an attack, an onslaught. Impetuousness means, so accusative, charge. Faciunt, or it can mean an attack with facio. Idiom, impetum facere, which means to literally make an attack. Man, Latin idioms, they're pretty there on the face of it. Nothing terribly tricky about them. So faciunt, third person plural, present active indicative. We already said we needed a primary sequence of facio, facere, feci, factus, to make or to do. So nevertheless, the Gauls are making an attack with the greatest boldness, even though the fear of ruination is great. Even though the fear of calamity is great, of downfall looms large, the Gauls nevertheless are attacking with greatest boldness. Nona, sententia nona. Cum sagittas suos amamisisset, Galilorum ducem petere non potuit. So cum, when, since, although. Sagittas, from sagitta, I, feminine, arrow, like Sagittarius, bowman. Suos, suos, reflexive possessive adjective. The su part goes to the subject, so circle the su part and draw an arrow to the subject. And then os, the os part here, modifies the sagittas. So sagittas suos, accusative plural feminine. So someone's own arrows. When, since, although, someone's own arrows, direct object, amiciset. Third person singular, pluperfect active, subjunctive. So amitto, amittere, amici, amisus, to lose, to let go away. When, since, although, he had lost his own arrows. Whose arrows are they? The subject's, his own. Gallorum ducem petere non potuit. Gallorum, genitive plural masculine, probably his possession. Ducem, dux, ducus, masculine, leader, guide. So the leader of the Gauls leader. Petere, petere, from peto, petere, petivi, petitus. It's the root of impetus. You can see the peto in there. Its root meaning is a quick forward motion. And that quick forward motion can be to attack someone, to ask someone something, to aim at someone, to look for someone, to seek out something. But it means like a motion forward. So it's a highly contextual verb. You need to know the context, what's going on around the verb to figure out how best to translate it. Now, we know we're dealing with arrows. So what do you do with arrows? You eat them. No, you don't eat them. What else do you do with arrows? You put them on your head. No, you don't put them on your head. You aim with them. Aim. Peto can also mean to take aim at. And it's a present active infinitive. Probably is a complementary infinitive of this possum here, because possum screams out for a complementary infinitive to complete or complement its meaning. Possum, posse, potui, to be able to, can, with the complementary infinitive, and the negative adverb non potuit. So he was not able to aim at the direct object, the leader of the Gauls. Why? Well, since he had lost his arrows. This is probably going to be cum causal. Since or because he had lost his arrows, he could not aim at the leader of the Gauls. He was not able to take aim at the leader of the Gauls. And then decima, sententia decima. Cum Caesar esset in Gallia, multa consilia ei proposita sunt a legatis. So cum, when, since, although, Caesar, Caesar is masculine, subject, nominative, Caesar, esset, third person singular, imperfect, active, subjunctive of sum esse fui futurus. If it's the imperfect subjunctive, our main verb is in secondary sequence. In plus the ablative of Gallia I feminine, Gaul, so we are located in Gallia. When, since, or although Caesar was in Gaul. Multa consilia, multa from multus aum, much plural, many, adjective modifying consilia, from concilium, concili, neuter. So plans, advice, counsel. Many plans, much advice, so counsel. Ei, either the nominative plural masculine, probably not going to be, or it could be dative singular, masculine, feminine, or neuter. Proposita, proposita. That is from propono, proponere, proposui, propositus. So propositus, So it's going to be the fourth principal part, and it has the helping verb sunt. Sunt being the present tense of sum esse fui futurus. As a helping verb with this fourth principal part, it is the perfect passive form of the verb. And notice that it is plural, so preposita is going to be plural neuter form. Therefore, it's going to modify something that's plural neuter. Concilia. So the concilia were preposita, were pono, ponere, posui, positos, placed, proposed. They were placed forward. Passive voice verb, by whom? Ab plus the ablative, personal agent, legatus e masculine, the lieutenants, the legates. Probably not ambassadors here. Probably is the legates, which was a staff officer of the Roman army. So when, since, although Caesar was in Gaul, many plans were proposed to him. So A is definitely the indirect object, and multa consilia is definitely the subject of proposita sunt, because subjects do verbs, or verbs happen to subjects if they're passive voice. Many plans were proposed, were laid forth to him by the legates. The legates are the ablative of agent. They're the ones actually laying forth the plans, but the verb is passive. So probably is going to be temporal, or you could say circumstantial if you like that flavor. When Caesar was in Gaul, many plans were proposed to him by the legates. Optime, what an exercise! All right, now you're ready to move on to exercise C.